who's going to start our program today.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah? You can hear me okay? Oh, I'll just wait for this group to come in. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Sandy Clark. I'm the Vice President for News and Civic Dialogue here at WHYY. And first and foremost, welcome to Philadelphia and welcome to WHYY. I want to first thank Stephanie Murray for bringing this summit here to HYY. And you'll see why we value collaboration so much in a few minutes. I'm reminded that a couple years ago, I've been at HYY for almost 3 years now. And one of my very first panels, maybe the very first one, was at the Cooperative Summit in Montclair State. And I have to admit, having come from print, I did not even really know what collaboration was at that time. So I kind of faked it at that time. But now I know so much more about the opportunities of collaboration. Yesterday, those of you who attended some of the pre-conference events really saw, the incredible work of so many people in this room. And so, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to connect and ask questions and to, not make this the last time you hear and see each other. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that we're doing at HYY in terms of collaboration. Oh my God, that's so frightening. Who did that? I didn't quite control this program the way I wanted to. So that's me. Anyway. So we look at collaborations in a couple of different ways here. And one of the inroads that we've made, I think, in terms of Philadelphia collaborations is really finding ways that we can play to our strengths, but also not being very comfortable exchanging roles when we want to. So we did this collaboration with the Philadelphia Inquirer on postpartum depression, particularly in women of color. And so here's a story by a WHYY reporter that appeared in print. And here's what the audio sounded like. Hit it, guys. Okay. And this was the Inquirer reporter who actually appeared on our...
The Philadelphia Inquirer and WHYY in Philadelphia partnered to report on depression and treatment options for new mothers. I'm Megan Scott, host of WHYY's health and science show, The Pulse. This story is part of our episode, Becoming a Mother. Philadelphia Inquirer reporter Neri Patani has this story.
So here you had the radio reporter appearing in print, and you had the print reporter appearing on our national radio show that is in 50 stations nationwide. A couple of years ago, this probably would not have happened, but that relationship building that happens behind the scenes of projects like Resolve Philadelphia, has made it possible for us to, continue to connect with each other. We have other collaborations we do at HYY. We have a statewide collaboration with 4 stations across the country. And in daily reports, we hear each other's reports, and we have an editor here at WHYY who coordinates that collaboration called Keystone Crossroads. You heard a lot about Broken Philly yesterday, and that is such an amazing collaboration, and it's the real deal. You heard a lot of props for Gene Friedman-Brodowski. It takes someone who can really understand the journalism, but understand sort of the psychosis of all the organizations to be able to make it work as well. And this gave me a chance to pull up a little slide of Billy Penn. You all know we acquired Billy Penn recently, and so really great to have them in the WHYY family. We have a new podcast called The Why, which is really a daily take, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, on one issue that's happening in the region. And as you can see, we bring in the best of journalism from across the region every single day. Those collaborations sometimes take a lot of time, especially when you're working with print reporters who haven't been out there collecting the audio. But one of the things is we're able to share how we report audio at the same time we're getting the best of their reporting, and we've really appreciated that collaboration. So we also look at collaborations in terms of community. Community is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's why I came to WHYY. You know, in the print world, which is changing rapidly, so I am not dogging print at all, because seeing the things that you know, print journalists are doing now in terms of community engagement is really inspiring. But one of the reasons I came here is to have a direct line to community. And so we partner with Temple University in their Germantown hub. We actually take reporters up into Germantown with stories that we've written so that residents can critique what those stories, how those stories play in those communities and what works and does not work there. It's hard for a reporter to sit in a room and hear somebody actually critique their story, but it gives us a chance to also talk to people about why we made the choices that we made and for us to rethink some of the choices that we made. We have a source diversity audit that we've been doing here at WHYY. You know, part of this is our effort from our Creating Culturally Competent Newsrooms project, and I really shouldn't call it a project because it is embedded in what we are doing here at HYY. We literally have tracked the race, ethnicity, gender of every source that we've talked to on all of our major shows, with the intention of the next time we do the audit, it better not show that we talk to 80% white people and mostly men, and overwhelmingly mostly men. But we have worked with people in the community to, you know, talk about like how do we build relationships. You don't go in there and be extractive and say, you know, give me all your sources, because their credibility is on the line too when they give us sources. But they've been really tremendous partners for us. And then civic dialogue collaborations are also another important part of what we do. That's part of my job. And we're able to partner with many, many community partners for that. You know, we've collaborated with Interfaith Philadelphia and, you know, New Conversations on Race and Ethnicity, on a conversation about race and religion here recently at WHYY. And this was part of a year of civil conversations around religion. This was a partnership collaboration we did with Al-Bustan, Seeds of Culture. So what we wanted was reporters in the region, and you will see Emma Restrepo, who's in the room right now, Jeff Gamage from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Laura Benshaw from WHYY, and what we met was with people from the immigrant community to tell us, how do you view our reporting? And you know, there were some very salty moments in that conversation. But I think, you know, this idea of just throwing content out there and then never hearing back and never knowing how people are receiving it or what narratives we are putting out that others then are carrying forward is not where we want to stop. And so this was a really great partnership. And by the way, I go back to that. One of the things that came out of this was two of these reporters ended up, Jeff Gamage and Laura Benshaw, did a joint reporting project together on immigrants seeking sanctuary in churches here. And Emma, I remember from that, also said, hey, if you want to know people in the community, come with me. Right? We also partnered with WRD Radio. You saw Sarah Lomax-Reese on a panel yesterday, and they have been tremendous partners you know, with us as well. The reality is that sometimes collaborations are also about what is the conversation you want to have and who are the people you're trying to bring to the table. This was a youth town hall. This is already an audience that Sarah has. You know, they are having conversations every single day on WRD Radio about what's happening, particularly in minority communities. It is not so much an audience that WHYY has. And yet, you know, no one wants to stay in their own space, and this was incredible, seeing young people actually lead the conversations. We're really good at talking about young people, but not so good at really finding out what they have to say. You know, I always joke about how millennials are covered. You know, they're kind of foodies. They drink out of mason jars. They eat quinoa, right? And so you think of all the people left out of that. And so we just let them lead the conversation. Tell us what you think. And then we also look at collaborations in terms of capacity building, mindset shifting. One of the things that we are doing here at WHYY is very intentionally reshifting the mindset of our news operation, and hopefully our company as well, to be a public media station that really serves the public. And what does that look like? And we are, you know, sort of finding some of these things out along the way. We've done a lot of surveying about how people feel about WHYY and what more we can do. But, you know, you can't change the journalism unless there's an awareness within the company and within the newsroom about, the issues of diversity, inclusion, and most certainly equity. So this was another collaboration we did. We creating a culturally competent newsroom. We've had a couple of trainings here already. We opened it up to all media in the Philadelphia region. Lifting all boats piece of things. If we're going to collaborate together, we also want to know we all come to the table right. And so this is the work that we continue to do. This happens to be Keith Woods, who's the Vice President for Training and Diversity at NPR. And then finally, we're in a new project now called Organizing for Neighborhood News, and this is working with Free Press and Temple and other partners. And the purpose of that is to really kind of, make our work a lot more transparent to regular people, right? No one should know what we do every single day because the work of journalists is not very transparent most of the time. So how do you work with journalists? How do you build a relationship to community members and likewise to journalists? We had a community organizing training through Free Press recently, again, open to all media in the region. And the purpose of that is to figure out how do we come up with a common language and build some trust with each other. So that's just a little bit of a sweep of what we do here at WHYY. I will say that just in the last day, yesterday I learned so much more. I'm even more inspired about things that we potentially could do, and I thank you all for being so generous with sharing what you do, and I look forward to having a great summit here, so thank you again.
Thank you, Sandy. Excellent. I'd like to welcome now Jennifer Preston and Karen Runlet up to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Karen Runlet and I are thrilled to be here. I am very thrilled to be back here in Philadelphia, where I began my career as a summer intern at the Philadelphia Bulletin. Don't look it up. I can tell you, it was multiple decades ago. And I'm also thrilled to have worked in Philadelphia as a reporter for the Philadelphia Daily News. And now at Knight Foundation, we are working hand in hand with the Lenfest Institute of Journalism with David Boardman, who is here, Jim Friedlich, Ken Hertz, and I am delighted to introduce Roxanne Stafford, who is the new managing director of the Knight Lenfest Local News Transformation Fund. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that. And I do hope that you will get a chance to meet Roxanne. Roxanne, could you just wave? Roxanne Stafford here today. I just wanted to thank Stephanie for all of the amazing work that you and your team have done, for Sandra Clark's once again inspiring us with her wonderful, generous spirit. When Sandra and I first met, when Sandra was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, I immediately knew that there was Sandra just spoke with such heart about community and the importance of engagement. And we all know that that is key and critical to the future of journalism, how we engage with our communities, which means we need newsrooms and journalists who reflect the communities that they serve. And that is where we think there is a huge opportunity with collaboration. For many newsrooms across the country that we see, there is a stunning lack of diversity. These are news organizations that do not reflect the communities they cover. We are very inspired by the collaborative efforts that we've seen around the country, because that is an opportunity for major metros, for local commercial television stations, for public radio, for public media, to join together with leaders for, may it be a local blog or may it be a legacy African-American newspaper, a Hispanic community newspaper, to come together, join together to serve the community. That's one reason why we are most proud. One of the grants that we're most proud of is the grant we made right here in Philadelphia for the Solutions Journalism Network to come here and to form the amazing collaborative around reentry, which became the amazing organization led by Cassie Haynes and Jean. Where is Jean and Cassie? Here today. Oh, fantastic. Just fantastic leaders, and if you haven't had a chance to learn more about their work, please do so today, because it's really just so extraordinary. Just one personal note. When Liza Gross from the Solutions Journalism Network told me that she wanted to fund a collaborative in Philadelphia, I laughed. Why? I worked at the Philadelphia Daily News. My husband, for 20 years, worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer. You know how difficult it was to do the tables at our wedding? Because people from the Daily News did not talk to people at the Philadelphia Inquirer. And to see journalists across Philadelphia come together to serve their communities, to serve all communities, it's just been so inspiring. And I would just like to turn this over to Karen Runlet, because Karen has a welcome to our very special guests from Night Cities around the country.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. We have journalists here today obviously from Philadelphia, but we also have journalists here from 3 other Night communities that I just wanted to point out to you. We have the folks from Macon, if you could just stand up, the Macon folks, and then if I could see. One of the oldest collaboratives with a partnership with a university, a commercial television station, a public radio station, and a legacy newspaper. Also, our folks from Detroit, if you could stand up. The Detroit Journalism Cooperative, ask them about the book they produced on bankruptcy in Detroit. And then finally, Charlotte. We've got a lot of Charlotte folks here, so if the Charlotte folks could stand up. Thank you. I know there are many other journalists here today. Some of you travel solo. The reason it's exciting that these groups are here together is because they're learning together, and I would love it if you would ask them what they've learned and find out what you can learn from them. I work on ecosystems, which is a word no one says in real life, but an ecosystem is more than one person, and so when a group comes, when a cohort comes, another word that we say in philanthropy all the time that no one says in real life, when a cohort comes together, change is accelerated, and that's really what we're trying to do. We're really trying to make change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to welcome Jim Friedlich to the stage from the Lenfest Institute for Journalism.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to just give you a couple of thoughts about the Lenfest Institute and how we think about this market and how we think about this work, and then offer some thank yous and then a couple of practical suggestions of ways that we might work together with nearly all of you. The Lenfest Institute was established with the goal of saving local journalism here in Philadelphia and by extension around the country. We seek to set an example. We seek to start here in the birthplace of the First Amendment to do so. And our founder, Jerry Lenfest, said, "We're better than Philadelphia to reinvent the future of a free press." So I think about him every day. I think about that mission every day. We are the nonprofit parent company of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, and Philly.com. And what that means is that we have at our disposal this great collaborative resource and an enormous news resource relative to others that we can collaborate with. What it doesn't mean is that our overwhelming emphasis is on the Inquirer. Our mission and our emphasis is at the ecosystem level. And I'm maybe the second person in the room that uses that word. So we're a cohort, I guess. So that's us. I wanted to offer a few quick thank yous. First and foremost to Stephanie for this amazing event. I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, actually, and what we then called Montclair State Teachers College. I couldn't imagine being a center of media excellence in New Jersey, never mind the country or the world. So I take my hat off to you. There are also 4 staff here from Stephanie's team, and there are 20 in red T-shirts from various universities, including Montclair State, Temple, and where else? Rowan and Stockton. So, if you're wearing a red T-shirt, thank you very much. Of course, thank you to Sandra Clark for hosting, and more than that, for your collaboration. And one of the things that's interesting about Philadelphia is there's this kind of cross-fertilization and integration of media that comes partly from the fact that many people worked in many different places. So Sandra is actually part of the Inquirer and Daily News diaspora that is a pretty big group here in this room and in this market. Jennifer Preston and Karen Runlet have been great partners. I appreciate you and your partnership very, very much. How many are here from Temple University and from the Klein College? It seems like at least a half a dozen. But David Boardman, who is in the back of the room, has been a terrific asset and partner for us. David is the dean of the Klein School of Media and Communications. I think I got that, Klein College. And we appreciate you and everything that Temple does in this market. Temple is arguably the most diverse school of journalism on earth, and has been an enormous force for good here in Philadelphia. I also just wanted to briefly recognize a woman who is probably not going to be happy that I recognize her, but who embodies collaboration and has really pioneered this ecosystem approach. I think she may be doing her emails now, but Molly Giaguiar is here, and Molly has just moved to Philadelphia, or back to Philadelphia, as I understand, and has really been a pioneer at Geraldine R. Dodge, the News Integrity Initiative, and now Independent Public Media Foundation. So Molly, hats off to you, and welcome to Philadelphia. One of the things that has most impressed me, and I think the reason there are over 200 people here about this conference, is its practicality. It is not a theoretic, pie in the sky cry for collaboration. It is a tools and hands-on activation of collaboration. So I have 2 practical suggestions for all of you. The first is that we have a really terrific asset in Yossi Lichterman and in Solution Set, which is a weekly story, not just a story, but a case study each week of something that is working well in collaborative media and in local media. This grew out of a conference that was funded by Knight at Temple that applied, and this is kind of meta, but applied the tenets of solutions journalism to journalism itself. What is happening in one market that could be arbitrage to another market? So Yossi writes about this every week. There are now 75 stories in the can, and they're just terrific case studies. So I would encourage you to all have a look at that and use it. The second is we have been collaborating with Facebook on a series of grants around membership, around digital subscriptions, and most recently announced around community engagement and the use of local news to enhance community. The grants are open. They're small micro grants, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, but that can be quite meaningful, as you know. It's a short deadline. The deadline is around Memorial Day, so that's something that you can all have a look at if you're interested. Cheryl Thompson-Morton, who you may have seen last night, and Mariela Morales, who may be here, are leading that effort and reviewing those grants. So they're also available to you to talk about what do we mean by community and kind of what this is all about. Lastly, it has been said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. We are brainstorming about what it would look like and what it would mean to have something like a Center for Collaborative Media or a Center for Urban Collaborative Media here in Philadelphia. If you have ideas about that, if you'd like to talk to us about that, I would really appreciate it. It's jim@lenfestinstitute.org. And with that, thank you very much.
Make sure you get Sandy your coffee.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and welcome again to the 2019 Collaborative Journalism Summit. I want to say, we've done a lot of thank yous this morning. I want to make sure to say thank you to our sponsors again, the Knight Foundation, the Democracy Fund, Lenfest Institute for Journalism, Airtable, the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, and Education NC, along with Montclair State University, and of course WHYY, are the reasons why we're able to gather today. So let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so now we're going to turn to the reason why we're all here today, more collaborative journalism. So collaboration is at the heart of what the Center for Cooperative Media is all about. The Center for Cooperative Media is a grant-funded program based at Montclair State University. We're in North Jersey, and our mission is to grow and strengthen local journalism. We were built upon the ideal that working together makes us stronger than working separately, and that working together in the public interest is going to be better than working separately in our own interests, which is why you're here today, to learn about how that is happening around the United States and around the world. And this is our third Collaborative Journalism Summit, the first time we've had it outside of Montclair. In late 2016, we saw a need to host some sort of convening around this topic because we were trying to improve our collaborative projects in New Jersey and talking to other folks across the country who were also trying to figure out how to improve theirs. And so now for the last 2.5 years, we've been building a national program around collaborative journalism. So I invite you to visit collaborativejournalism.org, which is the website where we are starting to house more and more best practices, case studies, research as we acquire them. We have a monthly collaboration managers call that's going to kick off in June. We have a newsletter that goes out twice a month. We obviously do this conference. We've done grant making before, and we're hoping to do more re-granting over the next 18 months to help support and seed collaboratives. And through the Peer Learning and Collaboration Fund, we'll be going to 4 U.S. cities to talk about healthy news ecosystems. Molly was the person who introduced me to news ecosystems and how collaboration works. Our goal is to do really whatever we can do to help support and promote and help you do what you're doing better. So today, I'd like to present you with our second State of Collaboration video. So this is going to give you, hopefully, a lay of the land as to what we're seeing from a high level of what's happening in terms of collaborative journalism. It's mostly based in the United States, this year's State of Collaboration, although we do touch on a couple of global topics. And so with that, let's play the video.
Over the last 5 years, collaborative journalism has gone from a little-known and largely untrusted method of reporting to a strong, vibrant, and growing component of the media industry. Journalism outlets have been turning to collaboration as a way to share data and expertise, to take advantage of digital tools, stretch resources, and to grow their audience, all during a time when the competitive landscape has shifted. No longer are most media organizations competing head-to-head with each other. Competition today is for time and attention. It's against social media platforms, gaming apps, search engines that personalize content discovery, and much more. Collaborative journalism is also gaining steam in part due to the massive economic and technological disruption that's destroyed some of the industry's core business models. Working in partnership is one way that news organizations, especially local outlets, can still tackle big and complex projects that serve the public interest in their communities.
When we say collaborative journalism, we're talking about journalists working across traditional media boundaries and across their own company lines to partner with other organizations to share story ideas, sources, tips, leads, and to together develop content that otherwise they would not have been able to do on their own. Today, by collaborating, we can leverage the power of many organizations all together to focus on stories that can have a big impact on multiple communities and can help solve problems together.
There are 5 big trends that we're seeing right now when it comes to collaborative journalism. Trend number 1 is that more collaborations are happening.
The number of collaborative projects we're seeing in the United States has grown quite a bit over the last 3 years. The number that have been launched in the last year alone is impressive. In late 2017, we started tracking collaborative projects in a database on collaborativejournalism.org, and lately it's been really hard to keep up. These new efforts are spread out across the entire country. Over the last 12 months, we've seen new collaborations in California, Texas, North Carolina, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Detroit, Denver, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and the list goes on. And we think it will continue to grow as more journalists adapt the practice.
What I have seen is that we find less and less reluctance from newsroom cultures and newsroom executives and editors to face collaborations. There's more willingness to work together, being open to work with local newsrooms, with people who have very different expertises or skill sets. I think that we have seen very successful experiments over the last 5 years that have convinced somehow that this is something worth investing in, despite the crazy 24/7 news cycle everybody is like sucked into.
The second trend is that more local newsrooms are participating in collaborations.
We're seeing a shift from collaborations largely being done or led by big news organizations and nonprofits, such as the Panama Papers or ProPublica and its many projects, to more local collaborations. News organizations in specific cities, regions, or states who are partnering.
When we talk about more local collaborations, the California Reporting Project is one example where more than 30 news organizations teamed up to pool and review newly released police misconduct records. In North Carolina, 11 news organizations partnered with Carolina Public Press on Seeking Conviction, a series about sexual assault and the law. Meanwhile, in Atlantic City, Stories of AC is an initiative that pairs a group of community members and a half-dozen media partners to produce a series of restorative narrative stories. And there are many, many other examples. Trend number 3 is that more people are being hired specifically as collaboration managers.
As the number of collaborations grows in the United States, especially local projects, and as the focus turns more from why journalists should collaborate to how to do it, we're seeing a rise in the employment of collaboration managers. This is because successful collaborative projects usually have someone running them, or at least a single point of contact for everyone involved. There are now at least 24 people in the United States whose jobs are specifically to manage collaborative journalism projects.
Trend number 4, more formal collaboratives are launching.
We're seeing formal, ongoing collaboratives being started. Networks like the New Jersey News Commons, Ohio Valley Resource, Alaska's Energy Desk, the Detroit Journalism Cooperative, and the Northwest News Network have been joined by Resolve Philadelphia, the Bay Area Media Collaborative, the Colorado Media Project, the Granite State News Collaborative, Bridge Pittsburgh, and more.
Broken Philly is a collaboration of 19 local news organizations in Philadelphia doing dedicated reporting on solutions to poverty and how America's poorest big city moves towards economic justice. And so I think really the collaborative nature of this project could potentially mean that we're able to kind of shift the entire public narrative on poverty in Philadelphia. You know, it's a city that for the last decade has had a poverty rate that's been the highest in the country, 26%. Half the city can't actually, struggles to make ends meet without some sort of external financial assistance. And so by having a critical mass of local news organizations who are not just looking at the nature of the problem, you know, systemic and historical contributing factors, but potential solutions, we have the possibility to actually, you know, really engage stakeholders who have the potential to make change in this area.
And trend number 5 is an increase in the number of projects based on shared data and documents.
As local newsrooms test out collaboration as a way to tackle big projects, one place where they see value is in sharing data and documents. And organizations like the Solutions Journalism Network and Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting are launching and supporting multiple collaboratives.
So the most challenging thing about doing this collaboration is doing the collaboration. I'm really committed to making sure that we have kind of a full spectrum of participation. And so that means even the smallest community news organization or an Asian African American, Latino news organization, and often these groups have small staffs, very limited resources. And so how do we knit together or create a structure by which big organizations and small organizations can work together, and so that they all feel like they're a part of it, nobody's being exploited, and that we're enriched by that. And so I spend a lot of my time cajoling those who unfortunately have the least resources to be involved, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to help them be involved.
So, what's next for collaborative journalism throughout 2019 and into 2020? It's likely that we'll continue to see additional local news collaborations, especially those with a renewed focus on equitable partnerships, specifically with ethnic and community media. We also expect to see more and deeper partnerships on stories with community members and organizations, as well as external funding of collaborative work, a focus on how to better collaborate by developing and sharing best practices, and more emphasis on measuring the impact of our projects.
I think the most exciting element about collaborative journalism today is the emphasis on impact. I think the point of collaborative journalism is really to get at the heart of what we want to do as journalists. We want to have impact. We want to protect the public good. We want to hold the powerful to account. And when you take out elements of competing with one another, when you use force multipliers like working together in collaboration, that's only going to make that easier and more effective.
Great, thank you. Thank you. All right, that's enough of my face up on the screen now. I'd like to welcome my partner in crime up to the stage, Heather Bryant, who's the founder of Project Facet, who we work together quite a bit in studying collaborative journalism and helping support collaboratives. Before I do that, though, if anyone has an open chair next to you, could you raise your hand? We've got some folks who are going to be coming on in, so you can kind of take a peek, and you can come on in and have a seat, because we do have quite a few empty seats I see open here. Awesome. I don't want you all to have to sit in the doorway. So now I'd like to turn it over to Heather.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So yes, my name is Heather Bryant. I work on Project Facet, which is an effort to build and support the infrastructure, the ecosystem, and the community around collaborative journalism. So clearly I'm very happy to be here. This is the good place for me. As the video showed, there's so much work for us to do as journalists, as community organizers, funders, advocates, citizens. There's so much to do, and it can't be done alone. It's complicated, it's time-consuming, and it's fraught. The world is not becoming a simpler place. And we talk a lot about, the war on journalism and this battle that we're fighting for information and freedom and knowledge and all of that. But there is no final battle that we're going to be able to fight where all of this suddenly gets easier. The world isn't getting simpler, the stories aren't getting simpler, but working collaboratively is becoming more and more common and more important than ever, and that is the difference between staying in the fight and being rendered completely incapacitated. So collaboration, true collaboration, effective, ethical, inclusive, equitable collaboration, it's an act of courage and an act of hope by journalists and newsrooms who know that the work to be done is the work that matters, and it will be done by those who are courageous and brave and bold enough to face our mistakes and try to build a better way of doing this work together, and by those who trust in the incredible work that we can do when we do it in partnership. I was talking to Stephanie about this recently, and it wasn't maybe even like 4 or 5 years ago. We were running around pitching collaboration at every conference, and nobody wanted to talk about it. Finally, one of them was like, here's a chair and a table in an hour, and it was literally the basement of the hotel. This year, we're talking about collaboration everywhere in the country. We're talking about collaboration in other countries. It's been a topic at every conference I've been to this year, and nearly a dozen collaboration panels were pitched for ONA, which was just incredible to see. And this is the 3rd Collaborative Journalism Summit. 3 years of saying, let's start this conversation, not all the way from the back at let's try to convince people to collaborate, but instead, yes, collaboration. Now, how do we make it work? How do we make it better? How do we use this to address the very real problems in our newsrooms, in our practices, in our coverage? How do we take what we know about collaborating and break down the barriers of tradition and nostalgia and do truly innovative, inclusive, and impactful work? And we're very fortunate because so many of the people speaking today are doing exactly that, and we get to hear about it. Collaborations are racking up Pulitzers and investigative reporting prizes, Peabody Awards, IRE Awards, Nearly 18% of the finalists in last year's Online Journalism Awards were collaborative projects. Out of everything that's getting published, collaborative journalism is still just a small percentage of that, but it's increasingly topping the lists of the best of what we do. And that's because we do better work when we take advantage of all of our experiences, all of our knowledge, all of our expertise, all of the connections we have to our communities, both of the people in our newsrooms and the people outside of them. So we've been documenting collaborations at collaborativejournalism.org. There's a database. It's in English, it's in Spanish, it's in Portuguese, because we want to be truly inclusive and capture all of the things that are happening in this space. And we've documented more than 200 collaborations across more than 1,500 newsrooms in more than 100 countries in the world. And it's state house partners, networks of organizations supplementing each other's work, dedicated newsrooms tackling the hardest, most heartbreaking things that are happening in their communities. It's scrappy groups refusing to yield to the barriers between them and data and documents that they need to work with. It's groups of people creating the space for those who might not otherwise be heard to be able to tell their stories. Each collaboration has something unique about it, and each collaboration means that there is reporting out in the world that might not have been there otherwise, or at the very least, not nearly as high of a quality. And we need your help to continue building this resource, so please, please keep telling us about your projects. Email me, tweet at us, fill out the form, send it in, however it is you get it to us. We want to know about it so that we can continue to build this incredible resource. And there's still so much ahead of us. I've been fascinated by this space for years, and every day it morphs, and every day we find new questions and new areas to explore. And if we think about the life cycle of different journalistic practices, think about like data journalism, engaged journalism, putting journalism on social media platforms. At one point, that was a thing that was inconceivable to newsrooms, but now we do that as a practice. So think about the phases from first appearance to complete integration. There's when a practice starts to occur in a more noticeable and frequent way than just an experiment or an aberration. And then there's the assessment phase, which as journalists, we are very, very good at doing a very extensive, very long assessment phase. And this is when early adopters are leading, putting the practice into action, while a significant percentage of non-adopters are monitoring and assessing the usefulness of the practice. Is this going to be valuable? Does this work? And of course, there are always people who are standing in the back of the room going, "You're going to make me do that eventually, aren't you?" The next two phases overlap somewhat, but there is a distinction. And there's the adoption phase, when widespread adoption starts to take place, and the form of the practice is largely consistent across adopters because they're pattern matching and they're following the lead of each other. But then there's the adaptation phase. And this is when the experienced practitioners and the new actors with new approaches and new forms of the practice are breaking the patterns and finding new things that can be done and new ways of solving problems using that practice. And then there's integration, when a successful version of the adapted practice becomes integrated into our process, eventually to the extent that it's no longer a distinct practice. And what's thrilling for us is right now we're in that adoption adaptation phase. More and more organizations are collaborating, and a subset of the most experienced and the newest practitioners, they're starting to stretch our understanding and our ideas of what's possible by trying these things in different ways. They're pushing us to be better. And fortunately for all of us, we have a great day ahead of us full of new things, new ideas, and people with new understanding of what's possible so that we can all learn together. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome to the stage Denise James, who is going to introduce our keynote.
Thank you very much. All right. It's really an honor to be here, and collaborative journalism, it's a pleasure to be a part of this conversation and to be among the folks who are absorbing what's being shared today. I've been in journalism, I was in journalism for 30 years, actively in a traditional setting, and teach at one of the local universities at Temple, as well as do communications for some folks that are right across the street, the police department. So really interesting. That's not quite collaboration. It's something else. I'll come up with a word for that by next year. But this collaboration piece is important in a lot of the organizations I'm involved in. PhillyCam, I see some PhillyCam folks in the house. PhillyCam, hands up. As well as the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists who are participating and collaborating in this. Collaboration is such a natural thing. It is natural if we really listen to our voices. I hope any news directors or former news directors or managing editors cover their ears right now. As a reporter in the field, we collaborated on stories as long as they weren't exclusives. And I'm talking about things like if you needed to go up to a house where someone had experienced some trauma, rather than have 5, 6 people go up and knock, we'd decide who would, ask the question if they wanted to talk to us to minimize harm. There have been and still are folks who will light whatever area for everybody who's going to participate. And there's some local television stations in town who actually share video. They have a video sharing service on certain things. But this is taking it to another level. And we have some folks offering a keynote this morning who have had the experience of using this in a way that impacted lives in the ways that we're trying to do when we cover stories. And I'd like to introduce our keynote speakers for this morning, Matthew Barraclough and Peter Sherlock of the BBC. Now, Matthew is head of local news partnerships at the BBC. He's been a BBC journalist since 1995, working mainly in the northeast of England in a number of roles, including radio reporter, program producer, and eventually editor of the BBC's radio stations in Middlesbrough and then Newcastle. And so that we don't mix them up when they come up here together, Matthew, if you would make your way towards the stage, yes? Peter is an assistant editor at the Shared Data Unit, part of the local news partnership program at the BBC. Pete started his career as a reporter in local newspapers before joining the BBC in 2010, where he worked in a variety of roles, primarily as a senior journalist for the website. Now, Peter, if you would do me the honor as well of letting folks recognize which is Peter. I love alliteration. Peter's got pinstripes. Okay. I'd like to welcome you both to the stage for your presentation.
It's a great honor to be here, and everyone said thank you, and I'm not going to break with that tradition. Thank you very much for asking us here today. It's been an amazing 24 hours so far, and I think it's fair to say that Pete and I, as we walked away from the offices of the Inquirer last night, we really wished we'd been to the summit before we started this project. But better late than never. As Denise said, I am the head of local news partnerships. So to use Heather's terminology, I'm a partnership manager, and Pete's still a proper journalist.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So I'm the assistant editor of the Shared Data Unit. For those of you who don't know who we are at the BBC, we are the public sector broadcaster. We're established by a royal charter. We're completely independent from government. And we're funded by a licence fee, which is paid by all UK households. That works out at about £150 a year, or $200. And for your $4 a week, you would get 9 national television stations, regional television stations, around 10 national radio stations, and 40 local radio stations, as well as one of the most respected websites in the world. We're also the oldest national broadcaster in the world, and the largest by the number of employees. And our mission is to serve all audiences through high quality, impartial output, which aims to inform, educate, and entertain. And we're here today to talk about a series of partnerships we've embarked upon with the local news sector in the UK.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the local news partnerships and what they are. We don't need to talk about what the problems are facing local news. I think everybody here kind of understands. And the situation in the UK is pretty similar to the US, maybe a couple of years behind, but we've seen closures of local newspapers, we've seen the loss of on-the-ground reporting effort, and we've felt that lack. And this partnership that was established between the BBC and the local news sector broadly was designed to support public service reporting, sustain democracy, and improve standards in journalism. And in particular, we had identified that there were several areas where we thought the BBC could make an intervention that wouldn't distort the market. So if we put public money into still a commercial market, what was really important was we didn't disturb the market. We only focused our funding and our efforts on the areas that were close to market failure. And so for us, supporting public service reporting was actually putting reporters back into town halls. Because when we spoke to people in the local journalism sector, they said that basically that was a luxury, it hadn't happened. And as the number of reporters declined over time, so the number of councils, the local government chambers and town halls were just simply not being covered. Sustaining local democracy by providing good quality information to as many journalism outlets as possible across the United Kingdom, and improving standards of journalism by focusing in on data journalism as an identified area of skills gap in the UK. Increasingly, it was becoming a mainstream skill for a reporter to be able to interrogate, analyze, and present data, but we all admitted that we weren't as well equipped to do that as we should. Just a little bit of how we go about establishing this partnership. So the principles that guided the allocation of the money were that we had to agree to a set of objectives, which I've talked about, and the way in which we allocated it needed to be fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. The access to the content that we produced needed to be as wide as possible. So we didn't target at one particular section of the local news ecosystem. Got it in the UK, and that meant that we confined eligibility to an organization's editorial standards. Their commitment to high standards was the defining element to whether or not they joined our partnership. We're pretty agnostic about the size of their operation, their business model, or what platform that they use to engage with their audiences. So we tried to make it open to all. The News Media Association, just to give you the context, is the trade body that represents local news providers, mainly the press publishers in the UK. They have about 1,000 newspapers and associated websites in their membership. That includes national newspapers in the United Kingdom, but the vast majority of their members are in fact local and regional newspapers. This is a quote from the News Media Association's chief negotiator, who's also the editor-in-chief of one of the largest print publishers in the UK. He found working with us, the process was similar to a grief curve. You can see why I wish I'd come to a summit like this before. We have very different cultures. We're publicly funded inside the BBC. The luxury of having a license fee and a royal charter that guarantees our independence from government gives us the ability to think long term, which is a luxury in the news market. And we have quite a lot of financial resource that's available to us. But we kind of tend to think about the public interest first. And we were working with organizations that were really struggling, that had to make a profit. And the culture clash created some quite stormy encounters. It took a while. Just from the very first moment in 2014, we had a conference, and there was, we invited everyone in local news into one room. We hadn't really done it before. It hadn't happened. Local journalists in the UK were gathering, but they were gathering around their own campfires. So you'd find that newspaper journalists were getting in a conference and they weren't talking to broadcast journalists, and independent web producers were talking to each other, but they weren't kind of interacting at all. And so we hosted this conference called The Revival of Local Journalism to focus on the answer, because we all knew what the problem was. And from there was kind of 2 years of the overtures. There was sort of fairly strategic type of engagement, not a lot of task lists and action, but it was a kind of pretty slow process, which eventually meant that we signed a letter of agreement between us and the News Media Association, and that was the starting gun. And from there, it took 2 years to create the local news partnerships as they now work in the UK.
So I'm going to be the fifth person to use that word in the first hour of this conference. Where do we fit in the collaborative journalism ecosystem? So we compared ourselves to the Centre for Cooperative Media's model of collaborative projects, which looks at levels of integration versus time. We are ongoing and integrated, so we share data and resources at an organisational level. And as the centre noted in its white paper, this model is seen as a particularly apt way of meeting the challenges of the local news marketplace. So the local news partnerships comprises of 3 key initiatives: a local democracy reporting service, which Matthew is going to talk about, a shared data unit, which I'm going to talk about later, and a news hub, which is a facility allowing local news providers to access BBC video to enhance their websites. But Matthew is going to talk about the local democracy reporting service.
So what is the local democracy reporting service? You need permission to view this. It's my video. I don't need permission. The local democracy reporting service is a decentralized public interest news agency in which the BBC pays for it, the market provides it, and everyone inside our partnership uses it. When I talk about the partnership, just to give you an idea of the scale, when we started in 2017 and opened the doors, 50 different news organizations agreed to take part, and between them, they represented 750 outlets across the United Kingdom. And we are now...
we may have to skip that video.
Don't worry. Yeah. We are now at 100 news organizations representing more than 900 outlets across the UK. They're signed up, and what they get is they get the content produced by this partnership. And they also get the ability to send people to Pete's unit. They get to use the video content that BBC TV makes daily. And they also get to bid for contracts to run reporters. So this is the current suppliers of this news agency. We had 150 reporters. We set aside £8 million a year to make this happen. The local democracy reporters cost a shade over £5 million in the first year. So we're thinking 150 reporters to cover every single top-tier local authority in the United Kingdom. And we need people to run those reporters, to go out and hire them and to direct them and to check their work and make sure it's good quality. So these are the companies, and you can see that the big, large companies that had the capacity, they had a human resource department, for instance, they were very confident about winning contracts and bidding, so they got most of them. But we had people who won, these are really small outlets that competed toe-to-toe with the biggest news providers in the UK and won contracts. Right down to Shetland News, which is pretty much the most remote inhabited part of the United Kingdom. And they've got a contract which gives them half a reporter. And so that covers the Shetland Islands. Just click on. So this is just a list of what those suppliers have to do. What is the contract between the BBC and them asking them to do? And the key point of this is that although they work for those companies, they are working in the public interest, and they work impartially, and that may be very different from the newsroom in which they sit, which could have a very clear political allegiance, and that's absolutely fine. But these reporters work for the public interest, and they meet the BBC standards of impartiality. And we give them money in exchange for it. So kind of each reporter's contract is worth £34,000 a year. That's about $45,000. There's a minimum salary. They must pay it to the reporter. The overhead, the difference between that minimum salary and the money we pay them has to cover everything. Their computer, their holiday leave, all the taxes that an employer must pay, and so forth. So it's a kind of flat fee. You pay it, you deliver. Another key part of this is that the reporters write all their content into a system that we design and operate as the, if you like, the honest broker in the middle of this partnership. It's based on WordPress, so it may look familiar to many of you right now, but WordPress is a very resilient platform. So all of our reporters write in this. We call it the authoring tool. We can check things like revisions. Every edit is recorded and logged. They can upload media. If they shoot media on a smartphone, they can upload it. And then a second set of eyes within their organization who has a different rights access will check that, so a reviewer. And it's only when a second set of eyes has looked at it, they hit publish, and it goes out to everybody who is eligible to get that content simultaneously. So if you go to the next slide. this is an example of how it appears in the web portal. So if you're a small news provider and you don't have a content management system, you just have a web portal with access. And the web portal automatically emails the partners and says, there is new content that you may be interested in. It rips out the first 3 pars so that they don't actually have to download it if they're not interested. It arrives in their inbox. So even our smallest partners usually get, maybe 2 to 4 stories a day from their local authorities on average. The bigger news partners, and the BBC is one of them, get it piped straight into our news production system. So it appears as if it was Associated Press or Reuters. We just give the whole stream of content that they're entitled to as a data stream, and they plug it into their news production system and make sense of it how they want to make sense of it. We don't mind. This is actually how it appears inside the BBC's production system. I just screen grabbed it a couple of days ago. And you can see that we also add extra metadata, which puts the local democracy reporting service into a BBC region, an editorial region that allows our journalists to filter out all the stuff that they're not interested in. So if you work in the northeast of England and you're only interested in the northeast of England, then you can just get rid of all the other stuff. Just to give you an idea of the volume of stories, the first reporter, Caitlin Webb, was employed in Kent on the end of January 2018. We've now got 137 in post, so we're still hiring, and we're about to roll the service out into Northern Ireland this summer. And this group of people, cohort, another word you don't hear in real life, has produced just under 74,000 stories, which have been distributed back out to the UK to our 900 outlet partners. So I think to make it kind of real, I'm just going to walk you through an example of what they do and where it goes. Sorry about the low resolution photograph. This is a local politician in Cambridge in England called Donald Adey. And this is our local democracy reporter, Josh Thomas. He's employed by a newspaper office in Cambridge. He's working under contract for the local democracy reporting service. And this politician really didn't like to turn up. But he did like to claim his allowances. And he was known as Disappearing Donald because he was just never in the council chamber. And in fact, if you were very hard to get hold of, if you didn't answer emails, you were known as Doing a Donald. And our reporter was tenaciously and doggedly reporting on Councillor Adey, who topped it all by moving house so that he was no longer in Cambridge representing the people of Trumpington, which is a little village outside the city of Cambridge, but he went to Scotland. So he went to a different country, and he settled in Fife in a town called Coupar, which is 400 miles away, still claiming his allowances and turning up to the minimum number of meetings that would allow him to do that. So we're going to kind of click through really quickly. So Josh got on the train, and 8 hours later, he doorstepped Councillor Adey and effectively challenged him on behalf of all the people who live in Cambridge whose money was being used to pay his allowances. And they filed a story. It went into the system. His employer obviously used it. So we all get it at the same time. This story drops into everybody's inbox in the Cambridge area. Cambridge Alive ran it. They also have a newspaper, Cambridge News. They put it on the front page. And the real win for this reporter on that day was he agreed to stand down from his city council seat, and therefore he would hand back his £4,000 a year allowance. The BBC, clearly as interested as anyone else, it was done by the radio. Josh was interviewed live on BBC Radio Cambridge, and the BBC News Online carried the story too. So he says he wasn't going to give up his county council pay. Next. iLift newspapers, also in Cambridge, they have print and web editions, totally separate company. They're also part of the partnership. They ran it. You can see different headlines. Later in the day, the local TV company thought, this is a great story, and they're also part of the partnership, but it takes them a little bit more time to kind of get up to speed. So they did a live with Josh Thomas. You can see that he is being identified as a local democracy reporter, which is one of the rules of using their material, is that you must credit the service. And unfortunately, the screen grab caught him at a moment where he looks like he's winking at the audience. But then he knows stuff. A couple of days later, this same story was still galloping around, and we just couldn't believe that there was anyone in Cambridge who didn't know about Donald Adey. The Daily Telegraph picked up on it. They sent an agency photographer, and by this time he's not looking as happy as he did earlier, I think you'll agree. And the Times also picked this story up, and the Daily Record, which is a Scottish daily national newspaper, they also picked this up through the natural process of news. So it started local, it supported local news, it fed a bunch of local outlets, and eventually, because it was a really good story, it floated up. So this is the list of the people who kind of got the initial benefit, and that was one story being filed into the system and giving everybody access to public interest reporting. And important for us is that it doesn't damage plurality of voice. So you can see there that people are using different headlines, they're putting a different angle on that story. It is not one version of the news. It's a single story that our partners can change under a fair use clause, and they can take it off and develop it for their own audiences. Just a final word here. Actually, in the end, Donald Adey agreed to step down at the next council elections from both his posts, which I think is a kind of a win for reporters and for lazy politicians. It's a defeat. The leader and the opposition of that local authority wrote to the government and asked them to formally close the loophole that allows you to be a non-resident representative in local government in the UK. Obviously, if that loophole closes, it'll be a huge win for our reporter. And the good people of Trumpington have a new elected representative. The election was this month, right at the beginning, and Barbara Ann Ashwood is now the councillor for that ward, which is a kind of really nice to see it come full circle. Not all the stories that our reporters do go so far or have such impact. Sometimes they only affect a small number of people. A planning application, a new house is going to be built. It affects a small number of people deeply rather than a big number of people. But I just wanted to sort of explain how it works in practice and how giving away these stories to partners enriches the kind of local news life in the United Kingdom.
So at the Shared Data Unit, we've embarked on a unique exercise in collaborative data journalism in the UK. So we'd seen how huge data leaks such as WikiLeaks and the Panama Papers had led to cross-national collaboration between news organisations. And we thought, well, why can't we replicate that at a regional scale in the UK? So what do? We bring together journalists from the regional press alongside experienced BBC data journalists. And the aim is to improve and enhance data journalism expertise in the regional news marketplace, as well as to produce data journalism content that we create and distribute for free in the same manner that the local democracy reporting content is distributed across our partner network. So why are we doing this? Well, there were 3 challenges when we were setting this up that we feel that we can go some way to meeting. Technical skills, time and resources, and information asymmetry. So let me start with information asymmetry. What do I mean by that? Well, we're awash with digital information, and much of it is free to explore and reuse. And we know that open data can empower citizens and it can help strengthen local democracy. And it can help us hold those in power to account and give citizens the opportunity to make more informed decisions about their lives. But it does none of those things if the data itself is sitting on government servers, unexamined and untouched, if it's just not being used. And the UK has a really good track record when it comes to open data. So it currently sits second on the Global Open Data Index, which ranks governments for how much data they make available to reuse. The US, unfortunately, sits in 11th place. There's a lot of data in the UK that journalists can access to tell stories, multiple stories, on matters of local interest. I had a look at, the problem is that data is not being looked at. You see, I had a look at a government a local government in Northampton to look at to see how much their data was being used. This is the usage stats from the data of Lincolnshire County Council, which is a large local authority in the northeast of England. Now, they had hundreds of data sets that they made available for the public and journalists to look at. 82% of them had 20 visits or fewer, and there was around 18 that had no visits at all. So I wanted to look and see whether that was representative. So I looked at another area of the UK, and I looked at Northern Ireland government data. So this was a larger sample size. There are around 1,500 data sets on there that were available to use. But a very similar story. 93% of those data sets had 20 visits or fewer, and around a third, 500, had just one visit. So I think it's fair to say in the UK, we are not, as journalists, we are not serving the people of Lincolnshire or Northern Ireland. Neither are we holding those in power to account. So what have we... And the reason why we're not doing that is because journalists lack the technical skills to find that data, to source it, and to analyse it. So at the Shared Data Unit, we have decided we need to make sure data skills become part of the regional journalist toolkit. And we need to open up the process so data journalism is not seen as the domain of the specialists in the corner. And we also need to make sure that hyperlocals and independents keep up with this evolving skill set. And that doesn't mean teaching everybody to code. It means making sure journalists know how to source, clean, and analyse data. And that's achievable. So what have we done? We've put together a challenging, rewarding, and constantly evolving programme of training, the primary aim of which is to give journalists the skills to find stories in data sets. And successful applicants, they come to Birmingham, where our headquarters is, for 3 months. And during the course of those 12 weeks with us, they become advanced users of Excel. And they learn how to clean and analyse data. By the end of their 12 weeks, they're scraping data from websites, and they're even learning to use the programming language R for a more advanced statistical analysis. But crucially for our audiences, the secondments are not just a training exercise. So journalists undergo their training whilst researching and pursuing a data journalism project of their choice under the guidance of the core BBC team. And so far, all our secondees have published public interest data journalism across the BBC and our partner network. They've explored how London continues to dominate UK growth and how millions of people are missing out on access to their GPs at weekends, how the number of new homes being built in the UK has plunged to levels not seen since before the financial crash. And we've given them the time and the resources to do just that. Because we know that many local news providers have been through a really tough time financially, and with resources stretched thin, it's difficult to commit to long-term investigative data journalism projects. So we can help address that. We know that a data investigation can take time, and data comes in messy formats, and it needs cleaning and normalizing, so we can help with that. So we source the data, we clean it, we aggregate it, years' worth of separate data sets. We find anomalies, we speak to case studies, chase up comments, even sometimes film video. And then we send out the whole lot. So it's essentially a toolkit of parts to journalists around the UK to use as they see fit, using the data that is relevant to their locality. Now, the Shared Data Unit's journalism has so far generated more than 600 stories across the UK, and that's across print, online, television, and radio. And in addition, it's made headlines across the BBC's network, across some of our flagship news programmes, the Today programme, BBC News 5 Live, the 6 o'clock news. And I just want to conclude by talking about how this works in practice. So this was Dom Gilbert. Dom was an experienced local news reporter from the east of England, and he came to us on secondment. Now, Dom had no experience of data journalism, so he was very new to spreadsheets. And the topic area that he wanted to look at was legal aid. And Dom had a hunch that cuts to legal aid had caused vast swathes of the country not to have the service, that effectively this public sector service had been decimated by funding cuts. And he had tons of anecdotal evidence that this was the case, but he needed the data to back it up. So over the course of 3 months, we gave Dom the time and crucially the skills to be able to pursue this data journalism project. And eventually Dom's analysis showed that he was indeed right. Hundreds of legal aid providers had pulled out of the service, and effectively £500 million of less money was being spent on the service. And he also found that in some areas of the UK, there was no legal aid providers for certain areas. So this was the area of housing law in these 5 areas, representing 1.5 million people in the UK. They had no access to a vital public service. So we published the following story, Legal Aid Advice Network Decimated by Funding Cuts. And then a month after the report, the legal aid agency, which runs the service, launched a tender for contracts in areas where it said it identified there was a lack. And these were the same areas that Dom had highlighted, Doncaster, Dorset, Portsmouth, and the Isle of Wight. So again, this was public interest journalism that led to change in the UK. It led to public authorities being held to account and acting on the journalism that was being done under our local news partnership banner. And Dom had been like a dog with a bone with this story, and he wasn't going to give it up. But what gave him the confidence to bring it to a conclusion was the confidence in his data work and the training that we had given him. So I know we face huge challenges in journalism, from fake news to funding models, for social media to sponsored content. I know it's entirely appropriate for news orgs to seek to meet some of these challenges alone. But there are some areas where collaboration is not only beneficial, but it's necessary, and data journalism fits the bill, I think, through increasing the skill sets of journalists, through raising levels of data literacy, and through becoming open data advocates. And the evidence is that we've made an impact on the industry already. So more than 50% of people, secondees who have spent time with us, have gone back to their newsrooms and have now occupy data journalism roles. And we know that the lack of data journalism skills is not confined to just to the United Kingdom. So in survey work conducted by the Shorenstein Center at Harvard, 80% of US journalists said they thought it was very important to interpret stats from sources, yet only 25% said they could do this very well. And as journalists, our role has changed significantly, so we no longer need to hunt and gather the information because it's already in the public domain. But unless we find it and seek to analyze it and explain its implications to our audience, then we're failing. And if we see our primary role as journalists to hold those in power to account, then we should all have a stake in promoting data literacy in newsrooms. And by working together, we can raise the bar for everyone. And to paraphrase one of your presidents, the rising tide lifts all boats.
Thank you, Pete. We're about to take some questions. I just wanted to kind of finish off our presentation with some thoughts. One of the benefits of working in partnership that we found is actually nothing to do with us at all. It's just that by working with us, we've encouraged collaboration among the people who work with us. So it sort of goes to the theme of collaboration becomes easier the more you do it, and collaboration also begets collaboration. Last year, when this project was quite new, but it was alive, we had a day in May where every newspaper in the north of England put the same story on their front pages on the same day. It had never happened before. The moment was called One North, and it was an attempt to draw the UK government's attention to the crisis of rail travel in the north. And the sense was that the commuter lines which feed London were getting all the attention, and actually people's lives were being made a misery by a really terrible rail network in the north. And they all put it on their front page. And that is, we think, because the lines of communication between them had grown, the confidence, the relationships, all the things that you guys do all the time and understand. It's fairly new for us, but it enabled them to put this story and to really get the government's attention. One estimate I saw, which was probably generous, but has some truth in it, was that the reach for One North was 37 million people. And the reason the figures went stratospheric is because not only was the story of interest to half of the United Kingdom, pretty much, but that the story of the newspapers coming together was a story which got the broadcasters on board, and suddenly it got national exposure. And I think it was a really important moment that we started to realize that although we limit ourselves to the shared data unit, to the syndication of video content for the country, and also this reporting agency that we've created, actually there's a bunch of other benefits, harder to measure and capture perhaps, but they are happening. And it just kind of, particularly in the realm of the local democracy reporting service, it made us think about what's happening here and what we read about in your country. Now, the local democracy reporting service is pretty much equivalent to the State House reporters that we have seen spring up in this state and in others. The close, detailed work that helps inform all of the media outlets in a given area about what's happening, what are the decisions being made in their name. What's interesting is the scale. So 4 reporters, this story here is about 4 reporters in Illinois covering the state legislature. Now with multiplying that by the number of states, it made us think that if there was a will, there could be a local democracy reporting type service, state house reporters in every part of the US. And I think the challenge may be that it needs to grow organically. There isn't a BBC in your market, but it's not a financial stretch given the type of philanthropy in this country. Financially, it's doable. So if there was a desire and if there was a need, it doesn't even have to be integrated. But the idea that there could be reporters in every state house closely keeping an eye on the people that we put there is it's an attractive one. And just a word about the future. This man here is my ultimate boss. He's the Director General of the BBC, and he likes what we're doing to the extent that he wants to do a lot more. So we've committed to investigating an idea loosely called the Local Democracy Foundation, which would take our work and the funding that the BBC gives it, and perhaps through the creation of a new legal entity, we would be able to draw on other people's resources to take this further. So for instance, as an example, most justice in the UK is dispensed in something called a magistrates' court, which is a court that sits without a jury. There are no reporters in those courts in the UK, and that means most justice in the UK is dispensed in the dark. This doesn't just worry us and some politicians, it worries the judiciary, it worries judges and magistrates themselves, because they don't want to dispense justice in the dark. And so this is an amazing opportunity for us to take the local democracy reporting service and say, there are 300 magistrates' courts in the United Kingdom. What would it be like if they each had their dedicated reporter who knew every cough and spit inside that courthouse? So it's a really exciting time for us. We're really busy. We're going to go to Northern Ireland this summer and roll out the service there, and then it'll be complete. But there's so much more that we could do. And I think one of the things that we've been inspired by visiting you and talking to you is the wider collaborations that harness funders and expertise and communities, because that is something that we can definitely learn from if we're to take our work up to the next level. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Hi, my name is Breen Ali. I'm a freelance reporter in New Jersey. I'm curious because the BBC has such a global presence and foreign bureaus are shutting down everywhere, whether you've thought about adapting the collaborative model down the road to other countries that you cover, maybe working with local journalism outlets in India or Africa and using that as a model to cover global news.
That's a really interesting idea, and for those of you that don't know, the BBC has a charity called Media Action, which is run by the BBC, but it is a separate legal entity. And I should just say that journalism is not a charitable activity in the UK, whereas education around journalism is, and Media Action is a sort of global charity. And we've had a conversation about what would it be like, rather than letting developing media markets go through all the things that happen to media markets, because it's happening to us right now, could we perhaps jump to a more sustainable model? And so I think there may be a role for us to work with other countries and share the learning and the template and make it kind of freely available. But I think it has to come from that country and those people to want it and to own it, and it's their service. So I think we would be probably very reluctant to intervene in somebody else's country, whereas, you know, that's different when you're at home talking to a home crowd.
Have you had to deal with the issue of perhaps making sure there's a diversity of content, whether we're talking about age and people living in rural versus urban areas and culture and race, as opposed to perhaps a monopoly of voices?
It's a good challenge because actually the group of reporters are not as diverse as we would like, and they're not our employees,
Yeah.
so we have a sort of strange relationship. It reflects very much local news in the UK, which I think has a lot of work to do to reflect its own audiences. I guess the thing is that these reporters are so tightly focused on such a specialised type of reporting, what happens inside that council chamber and immediately around it, and reporting that faithfully and regularly, that they don't get, I suppose, so much wiggle room to choose the manner of the telling, because the real area of market failure was attendance at the meetings, because it's been ages in the UK since a news editor felt confident enough to commit a reporter to a 5-hour meeting which may or may not result in something for the paper or the website. And we're underwriting that risk. That's what we're doing. So what you tend to find is that our stories are as diverse as the council upon which we are reporting. Sure. So in some places that means it's pretty good, and some places it's not so good.
And when you talked about, when you were up here earlier, you talked about you wish you'd been to a conference like this or a summit like this before you got started. What pitfalls did you discover, and how did you, what systems did you create to address those moving forward?
We just knew nothing. So we made all the mistakes that you've made and learned from. We made them all over again. And I think that's the kind of general principle, was that simply, I don't think we'd appreciated how hard the human and emotional side of collaborative journalism is. I don't think I'm doing our profession a disservice when I say we're maybe not natural collaborators. The cynicism or skepticism that it often is the hallmark of a good and tenacious reporter maybe doesn't help you make a leap of faith. And competition is something that you may have been weaned on, you know, beating everybody to the story and sort of effectively tripping up the opposition. You know, that's absolutely what's powering a lot of great journalism. And I think it took us a long time for us to understand, the people I was working with and me, that collaborating and competing can coexist. And that it's not a binary choice. You don't have to be completely collaborative in everything you do. And actually a lot of the best journalism that's being produced in the UK is powered by competition. It's a source of energy. It just needs to be harnessed right. And I think that was probably our key learning.
That's got to be the fear of many,
Yeah.
that losing the sense of competition, which is what usually drives us to go deeper, ask that next question. You were going to say, though.
I was just going to add to that in terms of from the shared data unit point of view. I think collaboration has to meet a need on both sides, and we the journalists that come to us on secondment benefit from the technical skills that we give them and the training during their 3 months. But we also benefit hugely too. So we've been, we've had an influx of journalists with local contacts and areas of specialism and expertise that our team had lacked previously. And it's also, a breath of fresh air to work within an organisation and have, diverse voices from around the country joining you to work collaboratively as a team. So, I think for me that has met the need on both sides. We've both benefited directly as organisations.
Could I just build on that
absolutely.
just very slightly? The BBC's news operation is founded on a principle of trust being the most important thing. And actually, that's something we needed to really think about, because if you base your ethical code and your kind of spirit on trust, it actually makes you quite a difficult partner, because you don't trust anybody else that they've got the same high standards as you.
Right.
And you worry that in opening yourself up, you are opening yourself up. And I think, so we had a lot of cultural barriers as an organization, but just to sort of second what Pete has said, so you imagine a big BBC newsroom. There are 8,000 people in BBC News, so it's not a small organization. But there aren't that many people from outside BBC News in those teams. And so for us to be able to really learn from and engage with people who come from different walks of life, different parts of the country, different journalism outlets, for 3 months, what we get back is a huge benefit. And we're only just scratching the surface, because the first secondees joined in, was it September of 2017?
Yep.
So we're now on our fifth intake. So it's still kind of pretty new, and we are still learning. But the culture has been a huge learning curve for us.
When you have collaborations that involve, and from what we've seen, very community-oriented outlets, along with traditional larger outlets, what does Goliath gain from David? What does the big outlet gain from the smaller outlets that collaborate together?
Well, in terms of the local democracy reporting service, at the moment it's an interesting partnership, because it's quite one way. We fund these reporters and they give away all their stuff, and we ask nothing of those partners, only that they respect the journalism. They don't, they don't misuse it. So it's a fair dealing kind of idea. But so they get a lot for nothing. And I think what we need to do is work out how we can start to use that relationship, which is effectively one-way traffic, and turn it into two-way traffic. I suppose the one thing I would say which we get from them, which is undeniable, is that we get to reach audiences that we, the BBC, don't reach. So we fund public interest journalism that goes everywhere. And we know we're doing a survey of every single one of those 900 outlets next month. So I'm going to be, I'll be quiet on Twitter for a while, as I do a lot of paperwork. But I think we're going to learn how much people use. But the key point for us is that if a commercial radio station with a much younger demographic in a city that maybe the BBC doesn't cover very well, if they run our stories, and we know that they do, and they run that in a bulletin, a high-profile bulletin at 8 o'clock in the morning, we are reaching a whole bunch of people who we will never reach to if we just stick to our own bit of journalistic real estate. So at this point, what the partners do is they connect the citizens of the UK to this important stuff, and hopefully that means that they are better empowered to make decisions or not as they see fit.
And I'll just add to that, at the shared data unit, what does Goliath get from David? It's the very nature of them coming into the organisation. That is our benefit. So by breaking down barriers, you change the culture of your organisation, and you drive innovation, and you start to think of new things, new ways of doing things. So it's their very presence which has brought us a breath of fresh air to our newsroom.
Now, do you act as well as an assignment editor or a managing editor in determining what stories you will accept from them, or is it just that you look at the credibility and the integrity of what they're reporting?
Yeah, it's the latter. So we would look at, we want them to bring their own story ideas and specialisms and areas of expertise that they want to explore. We have a certain criteria that we need to meet. So we need the stories that they produce to be UK-wide to meet all of the needs of our partners across the UK. And we also need the data to be quite granular, to sort of go down to a local authority level so that it works for local news. But we have no, and also the projects need to be of public interest.
And in the Local Democracy Reporting Service, we have a no commissions policy. So partners cannot commission, and that includes the BBC. So my role, there are 3 of us on the editorial side for the LDRS. Our role is to do quality assurance. So we dip into that production system, and we're looking to make sure that the terms of the contract are being delivered and the standard of the journalism is as promised. But we don't tell those reporters what to do. They have a brief and a contract, and it says they need to act in the public interest for the largest number of people as possible. And they make their own decisions. And the system is set up to be as transparent as possible. So each week they file their diary to the partnership. So they say, this is where I'm going to be, this is what I'm going to do. It's basically like their schedule, and they share that with everybody. There's a way of getting in touch with them. And it means if you're a small newsroom, you know what meetings they're going to cover, so you kind of bank that content. And if resources are really thin, it means you don't double team the meeting. And you can say, okay, well, that's really good. That means I'm going to send my reporter off to do another feature. So it sort of it releases the scant resource that our partners have in their newsrooms to some extent.
And I understand we have some questions in the audience. Where is the microphone? The one nearest to you is probably the easiest one. And then we'll work our way across the room.
Hi, I'm Allison Bird. I'm a Philadelphia-based journalist. I'm curious, when you said earlier, as you're talking about processes again now, you said earlier that each outlet has some fair use privileges. Can you go into more detail on that? Are they just changing a headline or the main photo? How much of the actual content of the story that can they change? And if they can change that, what happens if there's pushback from the original byline?
Great question. So our website has our terms and conditions on it, so you can knock yourself out on the detail of that. But I think the principle that you're talking about is this is a system in which it's a B2B. We are a wholesale news agency. All of our partners have to undertake ultimately the risk of putting those stories in front of their audiences. So that liability never moves. So if they change it and then they get pushback, if it's because of something they changed, then they've just got to own that. If it's on us, then we would investigate that from a quality point of view. How did that happen? But I think that's the way in which the system works quite well, is that all of us agree that as long as the journalism isn't, fundamentally that the story is not misrepresented, that's the key point. To give you an example, our reporters' work gets picked up by commercial radio all the time. Now, if you're writing for radio, you are going to turn a story into 15 seconds of copy, and you will never use a direct quote. So the story is transformed, and it's a nightmare because I can't track it. But the beauty of that is that as long as they are still being true to the story, then that is absolutely fine. So the level of transformation and editing can be quite high. Yes, they can change a headline. Yes, they could use another image. Yes, they could add another reporter's work and joint byline, and that is all within fair use.
This is Liza Gross from Solutions Journalism Network. First of all, congratulations. What an amazing effort at every level. My question to you is, what does success look like to you? And how is the perpetuity of this effort assured or not? Or are there any deadlines that need to be met, objectives that need to be met? How is it evaluated, and how frequently?
It will be evaluated twice a year. And the only way we can get a real sense is by doing that survey, in depth over a seven-day period twice a year. And I just touched on some of the challenges that we've got. If you give people a story and you say you can use it on any platform, it is really difficult to track it. So we tried to dream up clever ways in which we could scrape that information automatically and kind of produce metrics. And equally, we would love to be able to tell you how many people were reached by this service, but we can't deduplicate all of our partner audiences. So I think, so that made us kind of say, okay, well, what is the actual fundamental difference? I think the difference is that we will measure the success on this by the quality of the journalism. That is the most important thing. And whether the journalism is adding to the sum of journalism in the UK. That's, in other words, are we doing something that wasn't properly done before, and can we demonstrate that? And as a proxy for quality, the use by our partners will be a measure that's very important to us. How much of this stuff do they use? And so we have, you know, it'll be really interesting to see what figures come back to us in June. There are partners like the BBC that will not use a high proportion of the content. We get everything, but we won't use a high proportion of it. And there's many reasons for that, and it's generally because we tend to take quite a helicopter view of any given market. And our local newspaper providers, they go right down into those communities, and we don't want to compete with them. So we want to kind of maintain our editorial scale. And so that always means we'll be looking for trends and patterns in that story, which is a real growth area for us, being able to spot things before anybody else does. This is a national story because it's here, 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 and here. And we're doing that increasingly. But it gives us something that is also hard to measure, which is knowledge. I don't know how many of you have worked in a newsroom where you've got a PA feed or an Associated Press feed. You don't use all of it, but it's valuable to you because you know what's going on, and that gives context to your decision making. Finance people hate that argument because they know, you know, the value of everything and the worth of nothing. But it's a joke, if there are any finance people here. I love you all. But I think that's the point, is that there are some benefits here that are going to be really difficult to quantify. And in the end, I heard several people yesterday talking at the Inquirer office about simply, you just know it's right, and we shouldn't ignore that. If it feels right in your gut, if it is a moral good, I can't measure it, but I still know it's true. So we will have some KPIs, but I think a lot of this is about we as an organization believe that local news is really important to the country, that we have an obligation to try and support it. We won't solve the problems of local news. That is a too big problem, and it's not really our job to sort it. But we have an obligation to be a good neighbor and to support other people where we can, and that's sort of why it's come out this way.
Is the content that's submitted multimedia or all print?
It's predominantly text, but it is multimedia. The reporters all get smartphone training and broadcast training from us at the start of their contracts. They're all qualified journalists. I should have said they have minimum 2 years experience, so this is not a starting out role. They need to be fully qualified by UK standards to do it, and that ensures the level of quality is quite high. Only when something interesting happens in the council chamber and it's filmed do we expect it to be uploaded, or they give us some interesting stills or maps or plans that allow the story to be expanded. Most of the time, council chambers are really dull from a TV point of view. It's only when something really awful happens or somebody sort of superglues their hands to a chair in protest or something that it's worth filming. And those are once in a while occasions.
We have a question.
So, yes, and we are out of time. So this is going to be the last question. I'm so sorry, because we have to take a quick little break. Here you are. I know. We could talk to you all day.
Sorry, I'm standing between the break here, so I'll try to make it quick. My name's Bernadette Woods-Plackey. I work at Climate Central. We are a climate change research and reporting organization, nonprofit based in New Jersey. And so a lot of what you're speaking about speaks to me on different levels, but I wanted to focus on the data aspect of this because I live in a world of data, and it can go so wrong when people don't understand it, but we are experiencing so much more open source data that people have to figure out a way to work with it. So in the essence of collaboration, instead of just training people for set periods of time where things can still get misrepresented, speaking from someone who's spent a career in science, are you collaborating with any data groups to help bring out those stories? Like on a lot of our grants, we work with NOAA and NASA and a whole bunch of different things, and we do our own data analysis. And that brings even more richness out of the data that's out there. So that's something to think about.
Well, I totally agree with you, actually, and we have been moving into that field. So I think as well as the the data stories that we produce. We see ourselves as open data advocates, and I think just training 15 journalists a year is not going to change the culture of local data journalism. It will do, as Matthew says, it will go some way to meeting that challenge, but it can't solve it. But what we've also been doing is holding hack days for members of the public to come in and learn about data and access inaccessible data sources. We've partnered with organisations in the UK such as Open Corporates and Open Contracting, who seek to open up corporate and government procurement data. And we've held hack days in which we work with journalists from across the country and members of the public to try and look at those source areas. So I think you're absolutely right. You can't, 3 months of training won't change the culture of journalism, but I think by working with the open data movement and organisations outside of journalism, we can do a hell of a lot more.
Pete and Matthew, thank you for traveling a few miles from home to be here. I appreciate that. There are a number of other questions in the audience. Is there some place, and I'm putting you on the spot here, where they might email their questions to you, and you, of course, with nothing else to do, would have plenty of time to answer some of those questions?
Yes, absolutely. So first name dot second name at bbc.co.uk. We'll find.
That's on the attendee list too.
That's right. And we have a website, which is bbc.co.uk/LNP, where we kind of put a bunch of stuff to help both our partners and the public understand what we do.
And I'm sorry, I meant to say as well, we have a GitHub page in which we publish all our data and the resources. Oh, brilliant. Got it there. So we share everything. We're completely transparent in what we do.
Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.